understanding, and we'll just address it.
Okay,
This
tell them to go to
this is
Jason.
on the
Yeah.
ORES site.
Yeah.
It's a list of
There's
all
no
these
reason.
projects.
what I was trying to call.
And every-
Standing by?
Oh, really?
Sorry?
I-
We have
here's
numbers
the
standing
number,
by?
and then it says.
No, we'll get to
Thousand
that.
Island Solar.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
There's some on here.
You're gonna have some vocal.
Rutland Center Solar, you've heard of that.
Just from
Yeah.
what's
So it
going
lists
on.
all those that they
Social
know
media.
about.
Yeah, that Thousand Island showed up in that IPP or the ISO list.
There's also one called Guns Corner Solar.
Without solar letters.
Exactly. And once the letters come and they see the realization of where it's going, it's like, I haven't done this in 14 years.
It was a public meeting.
What are we, just wait 20? Yeah, we can't. Doing it before that, of course.
So, did we get into any?
Okay, thank you.
Got Justin. Good.
Recording in progress.
Hey, Justin. Good afternoon. Hi, everybody.
Shall we go?
Yeah.
Good afternoon. My name is Paul Warnick. I'm the chairman of the Alternative Energy Committee at the IDA. We're here today to talk, try to get things started and start to understand everybody's position is if we get an application for a pilot agreement from Tracy Solar Center. And it's really, I don't think today we're in the position to talk about numbers, but talk about what everyone's perception is and how we're going to proceed. And I think maybe we'll start first by going around the room. Bill?
Bill Johnson, I'm a member of the IDA board and also the chairman of the board at the county.
And maybe to just kind of mention any, kind of primary concerns or questions you have.
Yeah.
Bob Hagman, County Administrator.
Marshall Weir, Deputy CEO, Jefferson County Economic Development.
Dave Zembeck, CEO for Economic Development.
John Condino on the IDA board.
Ed Waldrop, IDA board.
Lance Peterson, supervisor for the town of Clayton.
Rob Campany, engineer for the towns of Clayton and Orleans.
Ted Knapp, Town of Clayton Councilperson.
Robin Stevenson, Jefferson County Economic Development.
Peggy Sampson, JCOD staff member.
Travis Hoover, LaFarge Central School.
Nicole Parliament, LaFarge School.
Matt Duffany, the Fargo School Board.
Chris Powers, IDA Alternative Energy Committee member.
Thank you. We also have with us Ben.
All right, and Matt, you're also on the planning board as well, right?
No.
Oh, sorry. I missed, okay.
We have Ben, who's counsel for the town of Clayton, and Justin Miller, who is counsel to the IDA. So one of the reasons this meeting was set up primarily at my concern is that I think it benefits us to be on the front end and ahead of a request from the developer than chasing them after the fact. And for those of you that were here with Orleans solar projects, I know you were, we were stepped on our toes a couple times and we were chasing them instead of leading the way to an agreement that would satisfy everyone. So I believe Ben sent some documents to us. Has everyone seen them in Clayton on host community agreements? No. Okay. So one of the things, having reviewed, and Ben, if you ever, I know you've probably been into this more than I have, the permit has been issued, but they still have a lot of work to do until they get their approval to proceed. But they've been issued a permit, and in that permit, it talks about host community agreements and pilots to the host communities. And in the past, there's always been a concern about host community agreements and how it affects the other taxing jurisdictions, but I believe that the permit requires one, changes some of those concerns. So is it the desire of the two towns to negotiate a host community agreement?
I believe so. Ben, I'm going to refer to legal counsel on this.
Thanks, Lance. Yeah, for the town of Clayton, the clear preference is for a host community agreement. But I want to be clear, that would not displace a pilot agreement. The two agreements would work in tandem. So pretty much every case I've been involved in, there's been both a pilot and a host community agreement. more recently, developers have been trying to do away with the pilot by claiming that, do away with the host community agreement, claiming that the pilot is sufficient to address everybody's interests. But I think the important thing to remember is that the rationale for the two types of agreements and revenue streams are entirely different. Obviously, the pilot is a replacement for taxation, whereas a host community agreement is really an impact mitigation payment. It recognizes that there are adverse impacts to the project, and it's a way of compensating the town for those impacts. So again, the town would definitely like a host community agreement that has fewer limitations than the IDA has. We definitely look for a term of 20 years or more. There are certain numbers we'd be interested in that I'm not going to talk about today, but the town absolutely would not oppose a pilot agreement on top of that as well.
Okay. I know Jim Burrows isn't here for the town of Orleans, but having dealt with Jim in the past, I know he's been an advocate of host community agreements. So the concerns I have, and Ben or Justin, is under a pilot agreement, total pilot payments can't exceed what would normally be assessed at full evaluation. Would that include an HCA be included in that calculation? And let's say we're at full taxation and there's an HCA on top of it. Does that violate that provision?
No, as I have seen, no. So the HCA is not a pilot agreement. It's an entirely separate agreement. And I agree that with the uncertainty in tax policy right now and the valuation of these projects, we really don't know what's going to happen with a pilot or full taxation. So the whole point of trying to move the money more to the HCA is to protect the town from that uncertainty. But again, from your perspective, no, the HCA would not factor into your pilot payment.
Okay. That takes us to the county's position that they're going to expect full taxation, not for the whole pilot, but for their portion of the pilot based upon the new valuation model if it's ever finalized. So that may be something later on that we're going to have to calculate to determine. So
Is everybody familiar with that right now?
the new valuation model?
Yeah, just to share it with everybody, because I think
Well,
it'll be helpful.
the state established a methodology.
Justin, do you have a comment?
No, go ahead.
The state established back when Cuomo was governor, Section 575B of the real property tax law that requires the NYSERDA and Office of Real Property Tax Services to establish a methodology for valuing solar projects so they're consistent across the state. A lot of the reason is some assessors were using a cost valuation model, others were pulling numbers out of the air. So they tried to create a model. They released the first preliminary model, and I ran some preliminary numbers using both the preliminary and the final model, and they made substantial changes to it. The problem is that some small towns in Western New York challenged their procedure, and it's been held up with a restraining order from forcing assessors to use that model. My numbers, if the final model that they want to institute, my guess is they finally will, would value this project with land in the $50 million range. So compared to the numbers we were dealing with before in the previous Orleans and Clayton projects, substantially higher.
We're probably way behind compared to everybody else because at this point we've had no conversations or any information from Tracy Solar. So would you mind just kind of catching us up? The only thing I've ever received on is from Dave is the actual map. We were just questioning whether TI school district or just Largeville was involved. So I've seen the map. We know we're out on 180, right off of 180 between Orleans and Clayton there. Is there any more information that we know about it? Do we know how big they're going? Do we know? You must know that, I assume.
They got a permit for 119 megawatts. The majority of the project is in Lafargeville Central in the town of Orleans. I can't tell you how much I tried to glean out what parcels to determine it, but I couldn't find the parcels that are in the town of Orleans and Thousand Island Central.
I believe.
How many megawatts are in each?
Yeah, we believe it's all us. TI and I looked at it. We believe it's all the Parshall Central School. Between Orleans and Clayton, I don't know.
I don't think we have any of the parcels that, involve the school district, okay? But there is, I'm sorry?
That's my understanding.
That's my understanding also, although, there is some of it in the town of Clayton. And I think when I was talking to our, again, Paul, I don't.
Go ahead.
When we were talking about a road agreement, I thought there's like 2.1 miles of town of Clayton roads through that project, I believe. But as far as any kids, attending TI in that particular footprint, I believe the answer is no.
Yeah, mine too. Out by Hart and Miller Road, it's a little close, right? Yep.
That's right.
So,
But I think it's also important to note that from our perspective, what we're seeing is there's 3 large projects coming to Jefferson County. Now, so whatever happens with the Tracy is the first one out of the gate, but right behind it is the Boralex project, and now this new one at Guns Corners.
That's right.
And all 3 of them are large 100 megawatt plus, which are all under state review.
where are those at? Just help me out.
Well, Boralex is in Houndsfield and Watertown, and you're thinking of Riverside, which is in Brownville and Lang.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Okay.
But I just found there's other projects. There's Guns Corners Solar. There's a bunch of other projects that haven't gotten into the queue to get reviewed yet. I mean, Tracy is 2 to 3 years into their review process to get to this point already. Okay. And I'll be honest, I picked Tracy because I thought this one makes sense because we've dealt with you before. And I believe the impacts from this project are probably less than the other 2. Some of the location, ag lands, impacts on housing, property values may be less in this area, and it's not the high-end agricultural that you'd find in Houndsfield and Watertown. So that's the reason we chose to have preliminary discussions with this project first.
Thank you.
And what I'll do is I'll get a list of links together that Marshall or Dave can send out to everyone. There's hundreds of documents on Tracy out there at the ORES site, but you cannot glean from what they have online what parcel numbers. It's very hard to figure out what school district it was.
Okay.
But I know there's a few parcels in Clayton, but not TI.
Correct.
Okay.
So Paul, one question I have, you had mentioned the fact that coming up with the evaluation
Mhm.
and you threw out the 50 million, which included capital build outs per se or value of the project with land. Will the land be taxed separately going forward from outside of the project?
If the model stays the same, until you know what the lease payments are in total and what the terms of the leases are, you can't really get a firm value estimate. And the values that we're using discount rates that were developed for 2022 roll that were never instituted. And the discount rate is going to take into account the cost of money. Well, we all know the cost of money has gone up. So that will affect the discount rate, which will probably drive down that value a little more. So as the cost of the project goes up, its implied value will go down. In the original model, they have something called a strike price in Tracy. And what they did is after a lot of complaints from developers, they removed that revenue from the cash flow analysis, and that cut. The original model would have valued this over $100 million. So they've already made a dramatic change to their model to in effect, cause local jurisdictions to underwrite these projects more.
But I think it's also worth noting in perspective for everybody trying to get to the same page of what the value of these are and the potential for economic benefit is the fact that we've all been building out 20 megawatt small community solar projects, and the revenue stream from those solar projects, their kilowatts they're receiving probably what, 8 to 10 cents a kilowatt range somewhere, discounted or whatever. The reality of the fact is, correct me if I'm wrong, but the large commercial, the 100 megawatts, are not going to be putting power on the grid at 8 and 10 cents a kilowatt. They're entering into contracts probably in the what, 4 and 6 cents a kilowatt.
Well, it'll probably be on the daily market, but
Yeah.
the
So-
issue is though, they've received a strike price which guarantees them a certain price. And I think that's just under 7 cents a kilowatt hour. You can check online and find out what today's price is. I bet you it's 4 to 5 cents a kilowatt today.
Yeah, the small product got to market and sell that. Or
So,
So Paul, this valuation model is a revenue-based model then?
yeah,
All right, okay.
it's not a true income approach to value, it's discounted cash flow, because since these benefits like whether it's a renewable energy credit or a strike price, that has a term that ends in 20 or 25 years. So its value is going to drop as that expected revenue into the future tends to decrease. I mean, the only thing that's going to hold the value up is a major increase in the cost of power. If nobody wants to see that. So, and as you're well aware, these projects are going to lose what, 1.5% a year. So, their output's going to drop every year. So this model will probably reduce its value. I would expect the state model will reduce its full value assessment every year. That would be my guess. Who knows? So my thought process is, and I'm going to throw this out to the towns. I've been death on host community agreements for a long time. But since it's part of the permit, I guess we have to accept it. What if the towns decided, and going to what I read in Ben's thing, is to protect you from this model? You get all your revenue that you expect to get from your share of what would have been a pilot and the community benefits, get it all in an HCA, and then our pilot is just written to distribute the remainder of the money between the town and the school. And we do an alternative distribution.
So I'm sorry, can you say again what you just
Sure.
proposed?
So normally the pilot would have the proceeds distributed among all the taxing jurisdictions. What I'm suggesting is you take what you'd expect from a pilot distribution, add it to your HCA contract, and then we do an alternative distribution where the pilot proceeds would only be divided between the school and the county, and you would have received your expected revenue through the host community agreement.
Yeah, I think hypothetically speaking, that would be fine. I mean, the town's gonna want to receive a certain amount of money every year. How it gets that is probably less important. If that would require, a 0% split of the pilot with a relatively higher number coming through the host community agreement, that would be absolutely acceptable. We'd have to look at the terms. I also like that because, again, I don't think the town is constrained to a 15-year term if we try to do an HCA. So, we can negotiate a longer agreement that way.
Yeah, because our term is 15 years. I don't think
pilot 15 years.
and I think that makes us easier to deal with the school district to figure out what their, with the county, once the model comes out, we can calculate what the county's full taxes would have been. And we can calculate what the full taxes would have been for the school, then negotiate if there's going to be any deviation from that amount. And then set it up as a lump sum to give them their certainty if that's acceptable to the county. So,
Mr. Warnock, I know you've done a ton of these with school districts and other places. And we found out, I think we talked about this last time, we were talking how HCAs are much better for schools than pilots as well. Because pilots have that huge negative effect on us at some point with our tax cap. So our auditors tell us HCAs have no effect on that.
I would refer us to our attorney because I've asked the question. I have not found, and you guys can correct me, council can correct me, a definition for what a host community is, but I believe our council said it'd be a stretch to consider an HCA for a school. And Justin, you can correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
So I haven't.
Well, if you, hold on, I'll answer the question directly if you don't mind. The town is the host community and deals with the impacts associated with any kind of project, whether it be renewable energy or otherwise. And in the context of site plan review and other local permitting attributes, has the ability to impose host community agreements to collect impact payments to absolve those issues. The school district, in this case, I struggling to figure out what impacts the school will have.
Okay. Listen, I think we'd all prefer to do an HCA because it not only does it keep your auditor happy, but it keeps it out of the tax cap calculation. And it's the tax cap calculation at the end of the pilot term that creates issues for schools. And it's one of the reasons we could never put a deal together for a town line project in the past.
Can we put a schools in with the HCA though? I mean, that's a possibility or not, I guess is my question.
I don't know the answer. I know we talked about it the last time we went
Okay,
through solar, and I don't.
Listen, if we don't know the answer today, that's what we're here to talk about.
Right, no, I mean, that would be a question, I guess.
But my question would be is what authority does a town have to distribute money out to another taxing jurisdiction?
I don't know.
But correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't the impact at the end of the pilot on the school's tax cap and shock of coming off it or going on it is greatly minimized by the way we've set up the other pilots, right? With the accelerated, with the front load, front end versus the back end.
But we're dealing with a significantly smaller number, Ed. Right. We're talking 50 megawatts times, what's your tax rate? 50 million times, what's your tax rate?
$9 per thousand.
450 grand. If they take a reduction, let's say it's 375 grand, that's probably more. What was your levy increase last year?
2% ballpark.
Was it more than 375,000 your levy increase? No. So just that coming off, and the county that has 6 million taxable, a couple 100,000 coming off of a pilot is probably easier to absorb than a school district with 6 million. Okay.
Fine.
And the impact of the school, just to clarify, to understand, it's not that the school is hurt by the numbers. I mean, it's their ability to maximize the benefit of that money because of the effect on the tax cap. I mean, so the numbers said it's still new money for the school, but the problem is at the end of it, you've now got to get the voters to support a tax levy increase to accommodate this product now coming off the pilot and paying full taxes.
Right. We actually have two end issues, right? We have issues on both ends, right?
What's the issue on the front end? Because I've run the numbers.
The front end, I believe, tell me if I'm wrong, Nikki, maybe I have it backwards, but we throw that whatever that dollar amount is, goes into our tax cap calculation, right, on the front end, raising what it looks like we have for value, which it's great for the community, but will take our budget vote to a negative 20, 30% is what we would have to go out on as a tax levy increase. Unless we go after a supermajority agreement. Now, in our district, we've always had historically a supermajority, but it's all about putting the PR with that. And then on the other end, it's making up the money, right? If you're using the money as part of your budget, the other end is how do you then get that back into your budget to continue some program that's lasted for 15 years? So you have the two ends of it that are a struggle.
I'd have to look at
that better than I can.
I'd have to look at the front end because when we ended up with Lime, it was really the end because all of a sudden you're going to have to raise your levy but you're bringing in 50 million in new assessed valuation that's going to offset that. So the tax rate will probably stay the same and getting your voters to understand
that. The front is less of an issue, right? The front is less of an issue because you go out at 0% per se, and you have to get 66% to say yes to that instead of 50. That's the front end issue because it would be negative.
Unless I misunderstood, two things. I think the challenge on the back end is trying to explain to the voters, we're increasing the levy. Your taxes are going down because we have this big chunk coming in, but we still have to, you're increasing the levy, it's not going to cost me anything. But on the front end, though, unless I misheard you, Travis, the problem, it doesn't add to the growth value. I mean, the problem is that projects on the pilot are not counted toward the growth factor.
They are not. Growth factor is taxable valuation.
Right. And the problem with the pilots too is that at the end, because of the way the state did it, they don't, even when it comes off the pilot, it still doesn't count towards the growth factor, which would raise your cap calculation.
So, yeah, when you talk about the cap versus what you need to make your budget work, that's the issue, right? They're kind of opposite. So like Lowville's issue, right, when the windmills came off, Lowville's issue was they had that for 15 years or whatever it was. I don't know the details of their deal, but the issue was they've been going out at 0%, 0%, 0%. That money became counted on as part of their budget. So they had to, at the end, make it up. So there's, at the end, you have that year where you've got to go out with a tax levy increase of 20 or 30 or 40 or whatever that percent is to make up that money or stop spending that money, you know, and you kind of become accustomed to it, right? Like your own home budget.
I think, well, to Mr. Miller's remark earlier about whether the school district has an impact, I mean, this sounds like an impact to me, especially being probably the only interested party at this table that has the project wholly within its bounds and jurisdiction.
Financial impact, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, that's a question we can get an answer for before we get into negotiations with the developer. My only comment is I can't believe that if you guys talk business agents and superintendents, you got to be hearing the same issue across the state with these.
Yes.
And there's got to be a way to change the tax cap legislation to get rid of that issue.
I know the superintendent.
If you can make that happen, well, I'll buy you a drink or two.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Is that better than the drinks you had last week? But the reality is, if school districts' reluctance starts holding up these projects the state wants, you would think they would find a way to work that into the tax cap calculation.
As we spoke last time, the reason we all are in favor of that declining type of payment is exactly what we're talking about. And that seems to be the best solution that we can have if it's in a pilot component. I don't know that there's been a better solution out there on our end, with the exception of this idea that some legal in schools are saying that host agreements are the way to go. And they're bypassing the concept of the cap. And then if we can bypass that cap effect, it's all positive for school districts.
My concern would be much like we think the state should identify the problems with the tax cap.
Yes.
I'm not sure that you won't see them say, wait a minute, host community agreements now have to be considered in the tax cap, and you end up in a big vicious circle.
Exactly.
I mean, when they start reeling the millions of dollars, I think one of the the HCAs that we got a copy of, it's $1 million a year payment. I mean,
yeah.
So.
Well, I think Justin, were you gonna say something?
Yeah, my apologies for the connection. There's a bill introduced right now that would exclude the new revenue from tax cap calculation and resolve the issue. And had a similar bill was introduced in 2017 and vetoed by the Cuomo because it was part of his marquee tax cap. The dynamic has obviously changed, and it's expected the governor will support this adjustment. So I think we have some headway to resolve that pilot issue in the near term.
That'd be good. That'd solve a lot of headaches.
Justin, do you see a problem with my suggestion that we do an alternative distribution and have the town get all their revenue from the pilot and the HCA as part of the HCA? And then
That's fine. That, especially if the county has an expectation, as you described, that'll take a little bit of pressure off the inverse impact on the school distribution. So the two contracts, I agree that they work in tandem and parallel. Ours could be shorter, theirs could be longer. It's fine. We'll also have a pilot mortgage in place, secured against the facility to act like a tax lien if there's ever a disruption of payment under the pilot.
So the pilot is 15 years and the host agreement is 20 years?
host agreement, and one of the host agreements we saw was a 30-year term, I think.
Or long, I guess, and you
Or
can do
longer.
that. Oh,
Yeah, typically longer than the 15-year pilot.
My only concern was if they aren't concurrent terms or the same term, let's assume we come in less than full taxation in the school in the county's position. When they come taxable, the town is, when the pilot runs out, the town's tax rate is going to come in. They're going to be taxed normally. So that's going to push it up dramatically for the developer, not New Orleans, because they don't have a tax rate and you're a couple bucks.
We're $1.47.
Well, it's still not a lot.
No, it's not for the township.
So one question.
The HCA's typically have an offset mechanism for any special district taxes or other receivables.
Right.
So offset the total HCA payment. So if there's a tax event during the term of the HCA, there'll be a natural offset mechanism. The formula should resolve.
Okay.
One question I have for the towns, and a conversation I had with Kevin Rarick, because they don't have a town taxing jurisdiction. They're after, his concern is the town wants to settle that through the host community agreement. Right now, when the pie is determined of the taxable income from this project, what percentage is going to go to the county? Looks like right now.
Of all three districts in
Yeah.
New Orleans,
Yeah.
I guess 38 to 40%, 60% to school, and 0 to the town.
Well, but under a normal, outside of a town like Clayton that does have.
Under 10%.
Right, I figured 10%.
It's a little less, probably 7 to 8% at $1.42.
So my question to some town
60.
representation here, as I know it applies to Orleans, they're looking at that 10% figure. So like, for instance, in the town of Clayton, for you to feel duly compensated, you're going to go after that 10% plus some additional host community, through the host community agreement, some impact offsets in addition to that?
I believe so. Yeah, we haven't discussed it, thoroughly yet, Ben, but if you want to, that's my understanding, yes. Yep.
Yeah, so if, for example, you look at the two host community agreements I sent you, the payments to the town under the host community agreement exceed by maybe a factor of 2 or 3 the total payment to the IDA, So under this structure, it's common that the town, you're going to look at one big pot of money. The town's percentage is much higher than would ever be under a standard pilot or the standard distribution of the revenue. I mean, this is the way of compensating the town more in recognition of the higher impact on the municipal entity.
So I haven't seen that document. So would that take that piece of the pie to 20% conceivably?
No, he just said that exceed the total pie. It's over 50% of the pie.
Yeah.
Oh, all right.
So for example, if you look at the Byron HCA, I think they were paid, on the order of just under $4,000 a megawatt in year 1 for 20-year term, and that's a 270 megawatt project. So just like reducing it to dollars per megawatt, they were getting just under $4,000 a megawatt in year 1. I don't believe the total payments to the IDA under the pilot were more than $2,000
See, that's not going to fly here. I think
per megawatt.
I think the payment to the IDA to cover the school in the county is going to be $5,500 to $6,000, and then the HCA is on top of that.
And
Maybe a little less.
The reason I asked the question is I'm trying to get as we all should, get an expectation of what everybody's expecting out of this process early on, up front. So.
Could I ask a question? Ben, if the county requires full taxation and you have the town getting over 50% of the as an entire pot of the funds, so where and the total pot can't be more than full taxation. I mean, do you see the school getting a drastically lower percentage, or how does it break down in your mind? If I can ask that.
So the total pot does exceed full taxation in all the cases I've been involved in, whether or not I'm representing a municipality or not. And the question is, what is full taxation? And we don't know the answer to that for all the reasons we've talked about right now. I mean, I've had an economist run some numbers for me, and it looks like these projects are going down to about $0 in taxes sometime after year 10 before year 20. So you have to keep that in mind. The other interesting thing to remember, and this raises a legal issue that I don't know the answer to, maybe Justin does, is that in every case I've been involved in, the pilot ends up paying more than full taxation. And I have raised that as a problem, and I've had both IDA and developer attorneys tell me that no, it's fine. You can have a pilot that exceeds full taxation. So just something to keep
Justin, I don't think
in
that's
mind when
correct, is it?
negotiating this.
The HCA might, but Justin, I don't think that's correct on these, our understanding of the pilot.
I agree. My reading of the law is that it's clear, but I've been told point blank, even in writing.
You're saying in reality, it works out that it's more, regardless of what the law says.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I would agree that a pilot can.
I'll let Justin,
Go ahead, Justin.
I'm sorry, I'm struggling I'd like to see an example of an actual assessed value of a full tax load against any solar pilot and see that the pilot payments exceed full taxation. Maybe there'll be instances now under the new formula that doesn't exist where it comes close. But I'm confused as to whether there's ever any pilots that exceed full taxation.
My impression would be that 5 years down the road, it's possible if you do set a pilot today at full taxation, you increase it 2% a year, and the values are dropping because of the changes annually in this model, you will potentially exceed full taxation if you do a lump sum like we've been doing and you do the increase. I still like, and I have to say it because it was my idea, the declining one is even more important with this new model because your value is going to drop every year. And you're going to have, like I said, unless you see a major increase in the wholesale cost of power, you're going to have deterioration of the panels. You're going to have increased taxes, which is a factor that drives the discount rate. All those things are going to point to a declining over time. But I don't think anything ever goes to zero unless they stop working. I just don't see. But
We tend to agree if the pilot revenue line and the full taxes equivalent revenue line intersect at some point in 5 or 6 years. I don't know why the owner wouldn't just voluntarily surrender the pilot and start chasing taxes. It's up to them.
Paul, how does the model treat the declining value? Just a rough idea, does it go from 100 to 60% over 15 years, or?
It's hard to tell because annually things like your discount rate, I would imagine 2 to 3 years in, they're going to be, NYSERDA will be looking at what their true output is, because right now everyone's guessing what 110, how many kilowatt hours 119 megawatt farm is going to produce.
But you can predict that with some level of.
Yeah, so you're going to have cost of money goes up, the value goes down.
Right.
Same like it. So, and there's a depreciation factor included. They're going to depreciate them.
But if those are all kept relatively stable, what's that declination look like?
It's hard to project.
Okay.
But I think Justin's not far off. I think within 6 to 10 years, even the pilots we have now, if they're switched to the new valuation model, are going to cross where the pilot is more than
Texas.
As far as big picture, Rob, currently, I mean, we do $5,500 per megawatt, 2% annual escalator, then we invert the schedule, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we base it looking at the 15-year period, over which period it's about 50% discount or full taxes would be. Okay. The model we've been projecting.
All right, so 100 to 50 over 15 years.
Okay. We're dealing with small stuff. The impacts of these are so much greater because of their size. And I'm concerned that once one is built, I wonder whether there'll be any support locally for any of them. You know, this one is buffered more than any of the others. So I think that's why we chose it, as I said
But at
earlier.
this point, once one's built, the transmission going south, done. You're not gonna get that power.
Unless they improve the transmission.
Well, you improve, but how far out will that be?
Well, I talked to Mr. Gray, because I was asking him to find out what's the state's plan for the line, okay? And he told me that most the emphasis on transmission is the other side of the state, getting it down from St. Lawrence, Clinton County, up there, downstate. That we aren't as far up on the transmission renovations as other areas. Now, you say, Ed, you've heard that a lot of these projects are into curtailment arrangements now where they're throttled back already.
Yeah. It's my understanding also.
So if they're throttled back, who knows what's going to happen?
Well, and here again, looking at what can happen and short-term versus long-term. In today's world anymore, I say long-term is 5 years, you know, whereas before we'd say it was 10 or 15 years. So, but as it relates to our involvement with solar in a 2-year time frame, I don't know, will it be Tracy or Borlex that comes online first? And it's been 3 years.
Could be any three of them. Only three of them.
But regardless, 120 megawatt is gonna fill the capacity.
Probably more than fill it.
So in order to get these, all three of them online, there's gotta be a transmission line out of here somewhere. So in reality, we have potentially three approved applications.
Chicken and egg.
But how fast can they happen?
You know where the ORES site is, right? Where you can see them at the bottom, there's a list. There's we just learned the other day, we have a wind farm in Rutland, a 2-turbine wind farm, correct, Bill?
Yep.
And I think there's 3 other large-scale solars that have notified their intent to seek a permit through ORES. They haven't filed yet. So that gets us to 6. One of them, Borrego, was 200 megawatts.
So would the 2 wind turbines fall under community solar or community renewable?
They're less than, they would fall under our standard UTEP for.
5 megawatts.
You working on that one?
Which one?
The 2 wind turbines in Rutland?
No.
Okay. That's if the information we gleaned off the internet is correct. It's just 2 turbines in Rutland. So it's a small project and it's being reviewed locally. I mean, I got a problem with the state's taking it out of the locals' hands. Is everyone happy in the towns with their decommissioning plans?
No. Flat out, no.
Isn't it finalized or not, or are you still negotiating?
We don't really get a choice.
Oh, you don't?
No,
I thought that the decommissioning plans you had to negotiate, and then if you don't agree, the state can step in and do it.
yeah, so the decommissioning plan is required by the terms of the permit, but the final details of the plan have not been disclosed yet. They'll be filed later as a compliance filing. The only thing the town can do is review it and comment on it. And then, ultimately ORES or the Public Service Commission will adopt what they want to adopt. So I can tell you under ORES regulations, there are a couple sticking points with decommissioning plans that the town of Clayton does not like and is not going to be happy with. One is that for decommissioning security, ORES sets a cap of 115% of decommissioning costs. The town would have wanted a bit higher than that to protect itself, but ORES will not require security to be more than 115%. Another problem is that ORES, and this is a difference from how the siting board handled things, allows the developer to apply a salvage offset to reduce the value of decommissioning security. So they reduce the decommissioning security value by the projected value of the salvage material. Again, the town doesn't want that either. We want to assume $0 for salvage in the worst case scenario. So, I mean, those are the two biggest changes. There are lots of other little things I won't go into for this meeting. But the true answer is no, we're not very happy with what we think the decommissioning plan will be.
If you review the Borelex, which is Watertown and Hounsfield decommissioning submission, they're estimating that the salvage value exceeds the cost. So they're showing a net to the company in doing it, and that's just.
amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a huge
Wow,
problem.
how would,
So then I gotta ask a question. If we're doing negotiations in concert, do we hold off even having any negotiations till we hear from the towns that they're happy with the decommissioning plan? I mean, that's gotta be a big leverage, isn't it? HCA's and pilot agreements as it relates to decommissioning?
I think it would be helpful for sure.
So, but the decommissioning plan I saw on the Aura site, that's just a draft then for
Yes.
Aura, okay.
I mean, having a reasonable estimation of salvage costs, but no one knows today. Who would have thought that PCBs would have cost this agency $1 million?
Right.
And,
2.5.
2.5? We got $1 million from the county.
Well, total project cost.
So who would have thought 50 years ago when they put down tiles that it cost $2.5 million to us? And who knows what, whether or not panels, something happens where now they're a hazardous waste.
Well, the other problem is the cost to physically decommission these is hugely variable depending on the foundation conditions.
Yeah.
So we're finding that, if you're having to back out rock anchors, right, and to get rid of the racking, that's going to take a tremendous physical effort. Okay. Plus, we don't know if there's going to be a value. Some of these racking systems now they're galvanized steel, so the salvage value is minimal, right? As opposed to aluminum has a little bit higher salvage value, but that varies. That can vary 2 years, 3 years. It could be zero. So that's why we want to take the salvage value out of the equation altogether. And the true cost of decommissioning these is highly variable depending upon site conditions. And the estimates are canned estimates, and they go by NYSERDA's, 3 cents per kilowatt to decommission these things. It's far too low in a lot of cases for these sites.
So you believe it'd be helpful if we held off formally finalizing any agreements till we hear the towns are happy with decommissioning?
I would think, is that your opinion, Ben? That's probably what my thinking would be, just simply because that does maintain what little bit of leverage the towns do have in this situation, I guess.
I'm not planning on having a solar panel around my headstone, and I don't want it pointed out to me, to my descendants 40 years ago, your father did this, and now it's costing us a fortune, so.
No, I agree, Paul. I mean, if we can't, we gotta figure out a way to get rid of them before we accept them, obviously. Obviously, it's not, like you say, it's not something that once they're decommissioned, we want them to go away. So I think that's good judgment. Let's figure out a decommissioning plan before we move forward with any
And I think
negotiations.
Yeah, because Aura may be able to approve the decommissioning plan, but they can't make us provide the pilot for the HCA. Right?
John, do you have any comments on decommissioning? And
I think John should share, the one project that's ahead of this one is the one in St. Lawrence County, and John's got firsthand knowledge of.
Actually, it's not ahead.
It's not?
No.
Well, I thought they were gonna be online before.
No, it's not actually. It's actually a little bit behind these, but I agree with Rob. The whole thing, the whole question of decommissioning, everything Rob said is true. For the projects that we're reviewing up in St. Lawrence County, the community projects, the smaller ones, quite frankly, there's a lot of pushback from the developers because in our estimates, and they are estimates, your best guess, we don't allow any salvage value, in a locally reviewed project. Now, all that said, the attorneys online here can chime in, but Ora's is going to have the final say on what that decommissioning plan looks like, unfortunately, much to the chagrin of the local jurisdiction.
So I have a question
Well,
for.
I mean, that's true, but we can also try to control the contents of that plan through, by making it a term of the host community agreement, right? So I mean, that's how it's all related.
Right.
So I have a question for Justin. Bearing in mind that communities want to put some teeth in the decommissioning aspect of this process, the fact that we may actually exceed full taxation under a proposed pilot. plus the fact that New York State's willingness to assume all responsibility for permitting and actually formulating the value and the pilot agreements. Coupling that with the lawsuit that's in place right now as far as demonstrating New York State overstepped its bounds, authoritative bounds in determining some of the evaluations. My question, Justin, is how much of a probability is there that with all those factors that New York State is going to step in and take this all out of our hands, and with their deadlines for renewables in New York State, do you see at a high probability that this is going to be out of our hands as we move this forward with the criteria that we're kind of putting on the table right now?
Well, the siting board's discretion is just that. They're a siting. There is some interplay between the town as an intervener to have an influence on the siting permit. But ultimately, New York State's a cool state. The assessor's going to make a determination of value. We are aware that there's a model out there that may be put into place early. The litigation is about tax and finance just screwing up the state administrative procedure and staff. It's just not adopting it the way that they should have. They should have just adopted it right away. At some point, there will be a stable model for assessment. I don't see an instance where the pilot will exceed taxes, otherwise private anybody tax. The combined amount of HCA payments and pilot payments likely will exceed taxation. But the HCA contract is a contract with the town, has nothing to do with the IDA or pilot payments. So that cap that we're talking about, keeping an eye on it, is literally just the pilot's revenue compared to what the taxes would pay. Ultimately, the assessor's going to make that determination.
So the answer to that would be, at the end of the day, no, it'll still be in our hands.
It's always going to be local control and assessment. I don't think the state's going to step in and be in there are some large utility assessment protocols. There's something called special franchise property where the state provides assessment amounts on large utility lines, transmission lines, things like that.
Substation.
In my mind, they might have done that in a better way than this, but we're trying to retain local discretion. For the assignment of value, utilize it there.
Thank you.
Bill told me a little earlier that you had discussions where the belief is that the governor is going to amend 575B, which establishes the valuation model, to remove some of the procedures that are in there and establish in the model. In other words, they get to dictate it. But, Justin mentioned special franchise. There's a lot of different areas of the taxation world where the state dictates how they're assessed, okay? Section 510 housing, there's a bunch of them. So this isn't out of the realm, but I think Justin's right. They're never going to completely take that away. But I just have one question for Ben. So in January, they received their permit. How long until they get their approval to proceed would you expect that to take? Because there's a lot of filings that have to occur, documents and stuff, isn't there?
Yeah, so I think conceivably the fastest that could possibly happen is a year, and it wouldn't surprise me if it was more like 2 to 3 years. Kennerlands, do you remember what they told us last in terms of their projected commercial operation date? I don't remember it off the top of my head.
It was over.
Quite a ways out.
I think it was almost 2 years, I think, was when
Yeah.
they thought about being online, if I remember correctly. I may be wrong.
Yeah, and again, they won't be able to actually, they won't get their approval to proceed with construction until there is a host community agreement and a pilot agreement in place under my reading of the terms of the permit. So, I mean, they do need to get these before they start construction. And just real quick to go back to the state assessment methodology, it's my understanding that the budget legislation that's modifying the state law is actually intended to moot the lawsuit. It allow the state to immediately re-adopt the plan they wanted without following, SAPA and everything else is violated or alleged they violated. So I agree with Justin. Whether it's a month or two from now or a year from now, it's going to be something very similar to the model that is currently on ice that you're going to have to use.
So $110 million construction cost is going to carry 45% of cost as an assessment. I would agree that cost isn't the right way to value these anyhow. So, but that's a huge knockoff from cost, more than I've seen in other areas. So I guess I have no more questions. And is everyone comfortable with setting up a procedure to proceed collectively forward with this process?
I think we are.
Yeah.
I mean, and I'm glad you brought up the fact that we do have a bunch of these projects come before the county, so in our county, and that's why we wanted to, meeting's good because we can put out where we're coming from, because we're gonna have more of these coming to our town. And this is an issue we're all gonna have to deal with, and so, yeah, I'm very happy with the meeting, to be honest.
Do you think we're gonna be facing in the town of Clayton, with when we saw the community really debate the issue of decreasing property values? Is that going to be a big concern, and with Clayton's projects down the road as well?
Sure.
That
Sure.
is going to be is it going to devalue property values by 50% around the area?
Well, I can't answer specifically, but I can tell you just in general that Guns Corners project, for instance, is from Guns Corners to DePauville, which is the gateway to our town. It's a very important piece of ground, and it kind of sets the stage when you come into our town, which was just voted as, #1 cultural place in the small town, right? So here we have that situation. And so that has not just immediately to the folks that are suddenly surrounded by these solar farms, but it has an impact to our economy, because, I mean, that's the gateway to our town.
Can I just quickly speak to that? In terms of property value, under the old siting board proceedings, they actually had multiple holdings in cases I've been involved in, where they said that reduction in property value is not a relevant issue. It's not something they're going to look at. ORES's regulations don't account for it at all. And although I'm not aware of anybody trying to raise the issue, I'm sure if they did, ORES would just hold up the siting board precedent and say, no, property values are not relevant.
Yeah.
Clearly they are.
To the individuals.
Yeah. So it'll be brought up, the public will, I'm sure.
Did ORES override any of your local laws requirements in their permitting process?
Everything but one item.
Really?
I know
We weren't even given an evidentiary hearing. No. When Ben can address more of that.
That's the biggest difference between the new process and the old process. Under both of them, the state would waive your local laws. Under the old process, they had to give you a hearing as of right. You were allowed to submit evidence. There was an opinion, you could challenge it. Under ORES, you don't even get a hearing. You request one, and every single case that they've held so far where a town has requested a hearing on waiver of a local law, ORES has denied the hearing and waived the law. So
we're not even a party to the process.
It's difficult.
Okay. So what I will do, my last comment will be, is I'll get some links together and get them to Dave and have him send them out. I'm sure if anyone that wants them, leave an email address if you don't have
Everybody,
it.
there's a sign-in sheet going around.
Okay. What I'll do is I will also send out the most current assessment model. Okay. If you have issues and when you're putting stuff in, give me a call. It's fairly simple. The one thing I don't know, and if you know it on the project, is what is their annual lease payment? That's the one thing I don't know.
proprietary.
They have to give it to us.
Not till the bitter end, I'm sure, but yeah.
Well, I think the best thing is we're not talking to you till you get, we aren't going to even have a discussion with you until we do this, 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 and this. And if there's things that the school wants that they refuse to give, or the town wants, I think we hold that out there. I mean, I'm still offended by some of the things they get confidential labels on the ORES site for.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
if you're a party, I think you get to see it, but.
Our pilot application asks them for that lease. You know, when the project we've been dealing with so far, those 5 megawatts.
Because when I ran those numbers, if they own the land, it values at 50,000. Okay, if they lease the land, I can't tell you exactly where this will come, but that's based on factors from a year-old set of factors for the 2022 roll. And they may not roll this out because we're past taxable status date, so I doubt they can amend the state law and get it in front of town officials. But I think when you look at that, punch in the current projects you have in Clayton, see what it does to the market values there. I think it's going to lower. Don't lower them until you're forced to lower them.
No, wow. That's the thing. I mean, it's kind of obvious. I mean, what's going to happen to somebody's property when they're surrounded by solar farms?
But wouldn't you say though, Paul, from rates we are aware of, that lease payments on a low side are $1,000 and on the high side in Western New York, maybe $1,800?
I think in this area, you're looking $500 to $6,500 a megawatt for leases.
Ben, do you have any clue what lease payments are? Yeah, it's not.
No, I typically don't represent people in that, so I'm not sure.
The only ones I've seen have been in Chameau, and they were grossly out of line. They were like a 5 megawatt had like a $36,000 lease payment. And I think it was more, it might even been more than that. But if you recall, he sold the project. I think that's how they're buying the project away from him, because it was way out of line with anything we've heard. But,
Well, and it does beg another question of, for solar developers, it makes more sense to buy the land than it does to lease it. I mean, if you pay 3 times its appraised value. I mean,
but any savvy landowner, why would they sell it?
Part of the Guns Corners up by there, it's not part of the project, it's part of the land. There's about 200 acres. It's owned by an energy developer in the town of Clayton right now.
Is that the sale that just went through last October?
It may have been, yeah.
Because there's been another one.
I wouldn't doubt it. It's going to be another issue.
Any questions from anybody? Any information you want the agency to get to you?
I'm sure we'll come up with something at some point.
Well, like I said, my whole process was I thought we needed to get ahead of this just because of the sheer size.
Yeah.
And so they're chasing us, we're not chasing them.
Greatly appreciate it.
I think there are 2 legal issues at least that I'm not sure what the answer is. The first is, can the school district enter into an HCA or not? I've looked at this recently for a fire district, and I didn't think the answers were conclusive. And then the second question, which is a sub-question, if the school can't enter into an HCA, can there somehow be, I guess, a larger town HCA with provision that requires the town to maybe a separate agreement to make separate payments to the school district? I'm not sure if that's possible or not either.
I have one question, Ben, for you.
Share a lot of services.
Have you seen these developers say that they have a maximum per megawatt number that they go to? Do you have an idea what that number is?
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you what they're saying. So it changes everywhere.
Right.
I work on this all over the state, and every developer tells you something else. There's been a market decline in the opening offer over the last year or so. So, going back to 2 years ago, the total pot per megawatt you're looking at is, over 5,000, sometimes more like $6,000 per megawatt.
Right.
And you're looking at all the money coming to the host municipalities and all the other taxing jurisdictions. Right now, the offers are coming in much lower than that. I'm seeing, closer to 1,000 to 2,000. So
For the whole
But is
pilot,
market-
HCA and pilot?
Yeah, for everything. So the 6,000 to 7,000 you're talking about.
I'm sorry
I
for
think that
wasting your
was
time.
correct a couple years ago.
Exactly.
I'm not sure it is now, but I mean, I don't know what the real market rate is because I don't represent the industry. And when the industry tells me what the market rate is,
Right.
I'm not sure.
Very big.
So recently I heard numbers in the 3,500 range, but
Yeah, and even that, I would suggest even that is low.
okay.
Well, bear in mind the small amount of large projects that are actually online and producing, I mean, reflects on how much in the developmental stage we are in all of New York State. I think we need to ask ourselves the reality from the developer side at $6,000 a megawatt. What's the realistic probability of that project crashing and burning?
I think they're waiting for the state to mandate
What
that.
they're saying now, what we're hearing is at that level, it'll never go forward.
Well, but what I get a sense at this table right now today with what the town's expectations are, the host community agreements that are tied to that and the county's 100% taxation, we're gonna be at that $6,000 mark, and
Then some.
this project may go and could have a high probability of disappearing.
It may.
Justin and Ben, do you know, have any large scale, utility scale solar projects gone live yet?
I can't think of any that are online.
Justin?
There's a bunch of 20s out there, but nothing on a major scale.
Nothing yet.
Or they go ahead anyway.
So again, we're the trendsetters again.
Yeah, and that's what I'm hearing, actually. I hadn't heard it went that low, but
Well, they got one opportunity to transmission
Interesting.
line and they're first in line, so.
Right.
To remind them of that too.
Well, but I will say, you've heard this on this board, with the state's push for throwing lots of money in renewables, for whatever reasons, you couple that, New York State's ambitious goals there with renewable energy, preferably solar, upstate New York is in an excellent opportunity to capture some of that opportunity. If it's done right. And so there's so many acres of marginal farmland that's going vacant now. The dairy industry is leaving as we know it. And that land is going idle. And most of it is not good farmland. It's mostly all marginal farmland at best. So if it can capture an income opportunity by placing solar there, it's a good fit for everybody if it's done right. If we can't do it right, then it becomes a disaster. But still, I think it's a shame should we not be able to capture that opportunity.
Ed, and I agree, and I was thinking about this when I was a kid. Of course, at Forky Farm, there was cattle on there, and they've tried crop farming, and sometimes you know how that is. That's just not going to pan out in this neck of the woods. One thing, even with the wind turbines, I have to tell you, the wind farms and stuff, and I'm all about done right. I agree with you 100%. I agree with you 100%. We need some foliage fencing and stuff like that, because I'm going to revert back to, although the visual of these solar farms aren't the same as the wind turbines, I struggled in my mind when I look over one shoulder and I see wind turbines, I look over the other shoulder and I see Bolt Castle. Okay. Am I going to want to be the guy that changed the sightline of the Thousand Islands? I do not.
No.
Okay. So with that being said, as you said, is there room for this? Is it a solar farm that's agriculture land? Understood. And that is a farm. And absolutely. But it has to be done right. We can't affect the integrity of the Thousand Islands. There's only one of them in the world. There's only one of them in the world. And we got to make sure we don't want to be charged. Nobody at this table wants to be charged with jeopardizing the scenic view of the Thousand Islands in general, so it has to be done right. I can't be more, emphasize that more.
But when I look at the map for opportunity, it's Lewis County, it's St. Lawrence County, it's Jefferson County. You know, granted, the Route 12 corridor,
Yeah.
those are places, it's like you cannot be allowed to see them. You don't need to see them, right? But there, I mean, if you had to find 30,000 acres for solar today, that would be off from main thoroughfares and provide economic opportunity, you could find it. You could find it.
But I think even down well, the people make very difference here, even down, some of the 12 corridor and stuff done right with foliage fencing and stuff. It's okay. That's all I'm saying. I'm clearly not against green energy by any stretch of the imagination. The communities need to be compensated, of course, and it's just, as you said, done right, it'll work. It'll work.
I love looking at the brochures they put online for these facilities, and they have beautiful growth. And the sun is perfect. They don't show you when the grass is growing up through the chain link fence. And
I've said before, and the Oya project is a classic. I'd rather look at you don't see them anymore, but the old junkyards where you'd be driving around the country and you'd be on a hill looking over, and here's this probably, 1,000 cars in a junkyard. They're usually lined up, and every car is a different color. It's like this burst and it rolls, I mean, that was I'd rather look at a junkyard with the cars lined up as I would some of these solar panels, But that site mitigation can be handled.
It's interesting, and again, so we're just chatting here with, you always get sold that they're gonna have sheep in there, sheep are gonna graze in there. And clearly, I grew up in the country on the farm, and then you start asking questions. What do you do, how does the sheep get water? And they stammer around a little bit. I said, what do you do with them in the wintertime? Well, who waters them? How do they get fed?
You slaughter them in the winter.
And then all of a sudden, well, they don't want to say that, I'm sure, Paul. And all of a sudden, well, we don't have them on every farm. I said, how many farms you have them on? Well, we got them on one farm up in Canada. Like, we're going to drive up and check it out.
Oh, there's one on Waddingham Road in Luray that
Is there?
has sheep in them this year.
Is that right?
I just thought you have 1,000-acre solar farm. How many sheep does it take to chew that grass?
Can we let the attorneys go?
Yeah. Any last questions before we go? I want to thank everyone for coming. Well, if you have any questions, you can call Dave and we'll try to get you answers. But we intend on proceeding as a collective group so that everyone's gets what they want and protected to the best of our ability before we grant a pilot.
Great.
Oh,
Thanks
great
for
job.
including us. We know you don't have to.
Recording
Thanks for
stopped.
including us.
And we are planning, we haven't set a date yet, to try to meet, or at least do a meeting like this, Zoom, whatever, with the